by the Civic University Network, of which my role at Sheffield Hallam University is to convene a series of activities that showcase best practice, good practice, events and various aspects of really outstanding work that the Civic University Network looks to promote and foreground. And today we are looking at Bristol's quite unique Civic University agreement, which has been developed through a kind of flagship partnership approach to Civic University agreements. I would like, therefore, just to run through a few bits of housekeeping. The questions that we will take at the end of the presentation, I would ask that they are put in the Q&A section of Zoom as far as possible. That the session will be recorded and will be made available to colleagues after the event, and that we use the chat function too if we want to, with regard to any live commentary that people have or connecting with others on the Zoom call. So to introduce the panel for today, I would like to welcome John McWilliams, who's the Director of Civic and Alumni Engagement at the University of Bristol, Tracy John, who's the Director of Research, Business and Innovation at the University of West of England, Bristol, Hannah French, who's the Deputy Head of Policy, Strategy and Public Affairs at Bristol City Council, Joanne Ward, the Vice Principal for Corporate Services and External Relations at City of Bristol College, and Nina Skubala, Head of the City Office in the City Office for Bristol. So I think, John, we'll hand over to you now, and you're going to take us through the agreement and showcase particular aspects of it.
I am, Chris. Thank you very much indeed, and thanks for everyone at the Civic University Network as well for the really great work you do in convening us all across the sector in this really sort of crucial area of work for our sector. And thanks for inviting us to share our experiences of creating a Civic University agreement. And thank you very much for everyone who's logged in to join in the discussion. We're really going to make sure we do leave a good chunk of time for discussion. That should be just as important as the presentation. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now, if I can. Let me see if it works. Just bear with me a second. Okay, can someone give me a nod that that's working? I can see you, Tracy. Thank you very much indeed. Right, so yeah, there we go. That's it. So this is our partnership grouping, as Chris said, and I think what will be most useful today is a kind of honest reflection. We've got together in our grouping and said we want to talk about all the excitement of getting together the civic agenda and signing Civic University agreement together. It is really exciting, and we're all very, very positive and excited about things in the future. But we also want to talk honestly about some of the challenges and issues that need to be overcome when you're creating a Civic University agreement. So we're going to cover both of those things. So this is a bit of a behind the scenes look, if you like, at the Civic University creation process. We're assuming we're speaking to an audience of people largely in the sector, either considering creating a Civic University agreement in the future, or who have already created one and want to get involved in the discussion about the delivery, or just want people who want some insight into how these things work. So that's kind of what we're imagining. We hope that fits the bill for who's here today, and we hope you find it useful, and we're looking forward to the discussion. So, and just to say, although we did launch in June, we still feel quite early in the process, and I think that underlines the fact really that these are long-term things, Civic University agreements. Ours is 23 to 2030, but they're really long-term commitments to our city and our place. So I think this is early stage, and you meet us right in the thick of when we get to the end and where we are at the moment. You'll see we've only just had a second really key workshop around Civic University Group. So we're very much in the middle of things as you meet us, and hopefully that's positive. But it means things aren't sort of finished necessarily. So a quick rundown of what we're going to cover today. Firstly, we'll have I just want to say a little bit. I mean, I know probably almost everyone on this call knows all about Civic University in the background, but I'll just give a bit of a refresher on that, very, very short. Then I'm going to go around the 5 partners, and we're all going to say a little bit about why we got involved in Civic University agreements, what our sort of stake in it was before we started. And then I'm going to come back and talk a bit about the writing of our CUA, a bit about that sort of the tricky process. We want one. How do we get to that thing of actually having a Civic University agreement? Which, by the way, I've got a hard copy here. I can't really see myself, but I hope you can see that. It's a nice document. And then Tracy is going to talk about the Civic University agreement itself, and is going to talk me through what's actually in it and a bit about why. And then I'm going to come back and talk about how we're planning, well, how we are delivering and setting up governance for that, for the delivery of that and the monitoring. And then we've all given there's one slide with just sort of some final reflections, learnings from the process. We're going to go back around the table of the 5 partners and talk a little bit about just some very brief individual reflections. Then there's some time for Q&A. So hopefully I'll try and keep us to time and make sure, I'll keep an eye on a clock here because I can't actually see it on the screen, make sure we get through this in time to leave plenty of time for questions. Right, so where are we? What is a Civic University agreement? Goodness, the way Zoom... Oh, sorry, I just muted myself. Sorry, apologies. The Civic University agreement, of course, came out of great work in 2018 by the Civic University Commission, which in turn built on a sort of building set of academic and other literature around the need for civic engagement for universities. And it sort of culminated in this really fantastic piece of work, Truly Civic, Strengthening the Connection between Universities and Their Places in 2019, led by, very sadly now deceased, of course, Lord Bob Kerslake. It's a really brilliant report. It pulls together lots of work the Commission did and lots of existing thinking about civic universities and had lots and lots of great insights. And the key thing, of course, was that all universities or universities that are interested in such things should create a civic university agreement based on these 4 key tests. Public test, a place test, a strategic test, and impact test. The tests really are really great if it's a sort of potted guide to what you're trying to put yourself against as a civic university. You know, can public test, can people talk about our university of pride and awareness? Strategic test, can university define where its civic boundaries are? Geographical area, things like that. And universities, we might think we know that, but we kind of need to write it down, and we need to get together with relevant partners and sort of collectively agree what that thing is. And it, you know, this is just a sample quote from that report. And I think we can all really buy into this. Universities have an irreplaceably unique role in helping their host communities thrive. Shot through that report is just the real importance of university as a place for universities, and it's a kind of revival of an origin story of many universities, really. A kind of, and so that's a really exciting aspect of the report, and that was what prompted this idea of get this thing on paper, make it public, and then be held to account for what you're going to do. So I'm now going to move. That's the background, and I'm now going to do a bit about why the University of Bristol is involved in the Civic University. You know, when this came out, what was it that made the University of Bristol think we want to be involved? Well, just firstly, a little bit of background about the university. We're a Russell Group, a comprehensive Russell Group university. That is, we cover most subject areas, not all, but most. We're around about 30,000 students, predominantly based, not solely, but predominantly based in the Clifton area of Bristol, which will become somewhat relevant later. We're, like many universities of our type and era, we're civic in origin, founded in 1909 by local manufacturers, politicians, and industrialists. And we've got, I think it's fair to say, a lot of really great civic building blocks in place, and have had for a long time, way before universities were talking about civic strategies and so on. I mean, I myself, I was a student at Bristol, an undergraduate student in the 1990s, and I did pretty organised community volunteering as part of a thing called Student Community Action, and we've got an incredibly vibrant student unions still at Bristol and have had a long time. They do a lot of community engagement work, and students do it in other forms as well. Got a great tradition of co-produced research, you know, of some really major projects like productive margins and everyday integration, which are fundamentally locally collaborative co-produced research that have won big grants and you know, have genuinely worked very closely with communities. Lots of education engagement, both via our School of Education and of course via widening participation initiatives. But I suppose, like a lot of universities, we haven't until quite recently had a sort of corporate civic strategy in place that sort of tries to bring all that together and say, what does all this make as a whole? I think things changed really in 2016 when we announced plans for our Temple Quarter Enterprise Campus, which is in a different part of Bristol. It's down by, for a start, it's part of the City Council's enterprise zone by the main train station, Temple Meads at Bristol. It's a really ambitious brownfield site development, the campus itself, but also the wider enterprise zone. But it's an area that neighbours areas very diverse and vibrant, but ones with quite significant challenges. And we didn't simply want, as a university, to build a shiny new building that didn't connect with those communities, but we wanted to create a vision of a new kind of campus that was genuinely porous and engaged and actually benefited those communities. And we wanted that to actually help us think about the university's strategy as a whole in terms of our local engagement. And I won't talk a lot about that project, but I'm just going to talk about one project and that programme, which is being built at the moment. That programme's still ongoing. If you come to Bristol, you can see it actually being built right by the train station. That programme started with an engagement team at the outset, and they've been working on lots of projects to pilot civic engagement. And probably the one that best symbolises it is the Barton Hill micro campus that opened up at the Wellspring settlement, not far from Temple Quarter, in 2022. Now, the Barton Hill area of Bristol, which is close to the campus, is highly diverse and vibrant, and we really wanted to pilot engagement activities with that community. The location itself is particularly significant and close to our hearts as a university because the Wellspring settlement, which is a fabulous community anchor organisation, it was previously the Barton Hill settlement, and before that was the university settlement, founded right at the time of our own foundation on this, you can see on the timeline, 1919. So, and the first warden was an incredible woman called Hilda Cashmore, again, about whom much more could be said. So this microcampus is a sort of return to civic origins, but it's also a reflection of the ambition of this major new development project at the university. And this slide just gives a sense of the kinds of things we're doing now at the microcampus. Sorry, the slide's a bit busy. I'm not expecting everyone to read all of these things, but it just gives a sense of we're doing a range of university community engagement activities, from collaborative research, which is predominantly where this space started, down to student placements and so on. So that's, you can see naturally that's where we were when UPP published the report and set this kind of call to arms to create civic university groups. Of course, we were really, really keen to get involved in one, and so we were one of the universities that signed up in the first tranche to create one. And I will, at this point, hand it over to Tracy. And just give me a shout when you want the slides changing, Tracy.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. Hello, everybody. I'm Tracy John, and I've been part of this project, really, or this programme to do the big Civic University Agreement with UE Bristol. And so I'm sure a lot of people will know UE already, but we're the other university in Bristol. So two massive universities anchored in our city. As you can see, we, like the University of Bristol, have got a large student body and a large amount of staff based very much regionally in the city. So we at the heart of the university are very much around the futures that we are looking to support and transform, and that's our students, but also what's our responsibility in making sure that the communities and the workforce of the future in the region is really in the best shape for the future that it can possibly be. So as a large institution that sits kind of a little bit outside the city centre, we do have some campus representation right in the centre, but we have 3 large campuses, and they are kind of not quite in the city centre. In fact, from a council point of view, we're actually in a slightly different council area as well, our main campuses. So in the North Bristol is our large campus with Frenchay, where the majority of our students are based. But we obviously work across the city in its broadest forms. And as a multidisciplinary, teaching first, research ambitious, absolutely through our roots embedded in the communities that we are based in, this is a really, really important part of the next stage, the next development of maturing the relationships with the key players in the region. So if we can just pop to the next slide, just kind of reinforces that thinking around what is our core strategy around our people, purpose and our place. So our kind of 3 key pillars. You can see on the right there 4 of the just some examples of some of the projects or programs, initiatives that we work on across the city that really demonstrate that depth in engagement outside of our core undergraduate and postgraduate delivery. But that people, purpose and place is like hugely important for us. And as I said, you know, that place, creating inspiring local and global gateway to the future, and making sure that we put the people in the centre of that as we do it, is core to the purpose of the university. So this activity, although I'm sure as we'll unpick in the future as we go through our slides, can feel, when you're working in a research intensive or a teaching-led university, it can sometimes feel like it's not core. It fundamentally is part of the DNA of what UWE and, you know, increasingly Bristol and other universities are making sure they build. So I'm not going to say anything more about UWE, and I'm going to hand to Hannah, who's going to talk to us about one of our other partners.
Thanks, Tracy. So I'm Hannah French. So I'm Deputy Head of Policy here in the Council. So I think obviously some of you may know Bristol very well, but we just thought it might be useful just to set the context, I guess, in which the CUA came together, and some of the opportunities and challenges in the city that we kind of hope to address as a partnership. So, you know, as a city, I think, you know, we've got a £15 billion economy, we've got a thriving sort of research and business sectors, and a really high, I think one of the highest retention rates for graduates in the country. So we're generally seen as quite an attractive place to live. And we've got a population expected to be around 550, sort of 50k by 2050. Equally as well, really strong community base, really strong community action and creativity, particularly around issues on net zero and climate action. And I think from the council's perspective, you know, both the universities and the college, you know, as we've just touched on, are major institutions. You know, their impact is weaved into the fabric of the city, as well as being key employers. And we're seeing that physically, obviously, is with the campus that John talked you through. So I think at the moment, I just checked, and I think in 2022, there's nearly about 70,000 students registered at the 2 universities. And over the last 5 years, I think we've seen about a 33% increase in numbers. So at the moment, students, university students make up about 9.2% of our total city population, and add a huge amount of value. Obviously, that goes without saying. I guess the reality sits along the fact that actually Bristol as a city has some of the lowest rates of people going on to higher education, despite having, you know, 2 world-class institutions on the doorstep. Significantly less people in Bristol go on to higher than the national average. I think we're about 31% compared to, I think, 42%. And in South Bristol, that drops even more to around 22%. And actually, we've got 3 of the 5 lowest performing areas in England based in the city. More widely, you know, we've got a growing population, but we've also got about 70,000 residents who are living at the moment in one of the top 10% most deprived areas in England. And obviously linked to this, you know, all those key determinants, we're seeing, you know, quite significant gaps in healthy life expectancy, I think over about 16 years between the richest and poorest areas of the city, you know, only a few miles apart. So I think these challenges, you know, they're reflected in other cities across the map, but they're really, you know, they're well recognised in Bristol. And there's a real range of engagement and conversations, you know, actively underway between ourselves as partners and obviously communities and other organisations as well. And I think from the council, the CUA kind of presented an opportunity to harness some of this sort of collective ambition under one framework and maximise the sort of conversations, similar type conversations that the council may be having a bit more individually with each partner, and bringing it together. And we also saw it as a bit of an opportunity to have a bit of a planned approach potentially about how we sort of support and drive, inclusive and sustainable growth. We're a city of, 42 square miles, growing population, but we're not physically going to get any bigger. So how can we work best together within that context? And obviously, there's we sort of touched on, there's a huge amount of opportunities coming forward, but I think it's about how can we strengthen as a partnership some of the foundations of our economy so that actually, it best enables all residents across the city to access the opportunities, as they're secured. And I think also just to touch, we're one of the smaller core cities, but we also, I think Bristol kind of punches above its weight a little bit in terms of the international profile and, our civic links. And again, we thought the CUA was a good opportunity to explore maybe some collaborative approaches to how we advocate, for the city on an international stage as well as closer to home. So I think, I'll leave it there. I think broadly the council kind of felt, we had the building blocks for the CUA already there, particularly around our partnership approach with our One City plan, something the council sees as a really key vehicle for this agreement, and I think something my colleague Nina will touch on in a second. And also we had things like the MOU from I think about 2019, John, we got that together with the council, the University of Bristol and City Office. We've obviously got a huge range of research collaborations with both universities and a huge amount of work with the college. And so, the CUA just provides us a greater framework, I guess, to really build on that. And we're seeing that in a live conversation around developing, co-design in areas of research interest. So I'll leave it there. Hopefully painted a little bit of a picture and given the council perspective, but I'll pass on to Nina, who can talk about our partnership approach.
Brilliant. So so I'm going to talk, I'm coming from the perspective of Bristol One City. So Bristol One City, we're sort of a leadership and partnership organisation. We're hosted by the council, but we're co-funded by partners across the city. And we were created 8 years ago. The whole idea was about creating a citywide vision. So that is to create a healthy and sustainable city full of hope and aspiration. And in that, what we've been able to do is create a One City plan right through to 2050. And that's across the themes of children and young people, economy and skills, environment, health and well-being, homes and communities, and transport and culture. And those are in that plan then are 3 annual goals across each of those themes that help to address all of those opportunities and challenges that Hannah just spoke about. We're in that we know that we're in some respects a very successful city, but there are so many opportunities and challenges that we all need to face. And that's where the City University Agreement comes into place. It's a way of bringing additional resource because we're already working together, but this is a way of bringing really a planned approach to help deliver this really ambitious plan. And as a partner within the Civic University Agreement, what we're able to do through One City is provide that infrastructure and that reach back into other parts of the city. So through the One City, we've got a number of boards, which you can see listed on here, but we also convene a group of city partners. And I've just put up the city partners are anchor institutes and leaders from a range of different organisations in the city. Those include political leadership, community leadership, business, trade union leadership, and public and managerial leadership. And this is a model, in fact, created by one of the professors at UE, Robin Hambleton. But the whole idea around One City is once you bring these leaders together and these organisations together, that creates this innovation or opportunities to help solve citywide problems, because all of those challenges that Hannah just spoke to us all about, that Bristol and many other cities face, it's not one organisation is able to face that alone. And that's why we're bringing in the capacity, the resources, the innovation, the research capability of the universities. We're able to harness that as part of One City. Our city plan is also underpinned by the UN SDGs. So by working in this approach, and our own Civic University Agreement is aligned to the One City Plan, it also means that we're able, as a city, then look at making progress against those sustainable development goals. So that's probably a part that's what I thought I just covered with you all this afternoon, and I think I'm handing over back to John, I think. Oh, sorry, no, I'm handing it.
I think it's
City of Bristol College.
Yeah, Joanne next, Joanne. Thanks.
Thanks, Nina.
Thanks.
Thanks, John. Hi, yeah, at City of Bristol College, we are one of the largest FE and HE colleges in the Southwest. We have around 11,000 students each year, and that is a huge range of students in terms of ages, backgrounds, and the courses that they're on. The college student body reflects the diversity of the city. We have 66 first languages spoken every day. So the college is one place in the city where it's completely diverse in terms of the makeup every single day. Our staff and students are local. So by our very nature, FE colleges are place-based. And that's why for us, the Civic University Agreement is so important to be included as part of, because we do have that local embedding in the communities we serve. Our campuses are all embedded in communities. And I think what we can offer to our HE partners there is a link into the communities at levels that perhaps that they couldn't access so easily without us. And John, there is one more slide, thank you, one quick slide, which is just to explain the college's higher education offer. So we do offer our own bespoke higher education offer, and we are so fortunate to have two fantastic universities in the city. It's very much a collaborative model. So we already had existing MOUs with UWE and with University of Bristol. So our offer is largely students who otherwise wouldn't go. A big part of that offer is access to higher education. So that is supporting students onto universities, and part of our agreements are around supporting local learners, particularly those from those areas which are more deprived, into our excellent universities. We also had a close partnership with Bristol City Council, as you'd expect, as an education provider for young people in the city. And we were one of the anchor institutions that were on the founding members of the One City. So really for us, the CUA brought together a lot of work we were already doing, but to have both universities around the table with us at the same time, and with the council and with One City, really means we can do our job, which is to support local people and widen participation for all our communities in Bristol. Thank you. Back to you, John, I think.
It is. Thanks, Joanne, and thanks everyone. And we're actually, bad thing to say halfway through, but we're actually doing quite well for time. So let's keep on track. So I hope it's pretty clear from our brief presentations about our organisations why this set of partners were keen to be involved in Civic University Agreement process. There's clearly a huge, and that was why we already worked together a lot. There's a huge amount of crisscrossing collaboration going on between these two partners at all levels and across many different areas. So and including some formal partnerships as has been variously noted. And this was the first group of partners that met at a senior level in the spring of 2022. And you could say what happened between signing up for the Civic University Agreement in 2019 and then, well, COVID happened and so on, probably what a lot of people are saying. But 2022 is when we actually first got this group together. And the first question we ask is this the right group? Should there be others involved? Is this the correct grouping for a Civic University Agreement? And also, what about geography? What about the concept of the city region, the wider area, to talk about, one of the key tests of the Civic University Agreement suggestions in the Kerslow report. Well, I'll take on that in that first. So we made a couple of key decisions basically in that first senior level meeting. It was chaired by the Deputy Vice Chancellor of the University of Bristol, and had senior people from each of the five organisations. We sort of made the decision that this would be the grouping because of the existing strong collaborations, and the thought that there was, despite those strong collaborations, a lot of them were sort of bilateral, and the grouping could be even stronger, but there was a lot to build on. There was a lot to kind of add a third or a fourth of the partners in. We just felt there was masses of potential there. But we didn't want to exclude other partners, and we'll come on to this when I talk about the workshops. We would include other partners, but we would build from a core grouping of these really strong, already interconnected partners, so that we have this kind of strong base of partnership working. The built up partners already working together. The geography was then sort of effectively determined by that. It was going to be a city-based civic university agreement. Again, not ignoring the great importance of the region, the city region, but we just thought to throw it wider open and to get lots of other parts involved. You know, we have a combined authority, of course, and a combined authority mayor, but then that would then be further higher education institutions, and we just thought that might dilute the kind of focused work that we could do together, but noting we would bring others in. And actually, another thing to say is I think it's a tribute to the work of the city office, particularly, which Nina has just given a brief glimpse into, that a lot of that wider convening work of lots of other key parts in the city is already being done by the city office. In a way, I know other cities have signed these civic university agreements with kind of more partnerships, but it felt like the city office is already doing that convening work. So we wanted to kind of focus on what a civic university agreement group could really add. So that was one decision at the very first meeting we took. Another decision we took was around consultation. Well, we perhaps took that decision over a couple of meetings actually, but it was kind of hinted at in that very first meeting. Should we consult? Again, some civic university agreement partnerships have consulted specifically on what people want from the civic university agreement. We decided not to consult because, well, why? Because we all our individual organisations have already had or had in close development civic strategies of some description, and all of those civic strategies had been consulted on in various ways, shapes or forms. That University of Bristol had done, I think, Learning for Our Paths, a kind of deep dive qualitative set of interviews with lots of partners, local government, industry, community anchors. And then we had a very large workshop at our university court, which included all or many of our key civic partners, where we specifically talked about what would you want in our civic strategy, what do we need to hear. And we've had lots and lots of other conversations on it. And the other partners in the CUA could say similar things about their own strategies. And in fact, in some of those consultation processes, people are actually saying, stop consulting us. We keep telling you what we want, just kind of get on and do things. So it was a really active decision not to have another kind of consultation process, which is all about civic university agreement. We just wanted to kind of get on and get together and see what we wanted to deliver. So those are the kind of two key decisions we took in that initial meeting, and then possibly first meeting. Then we took away that senior level decision and we had to create a CUA. Well, where did we start? Well, we had a workshop of what is now actually this existing steering group. 2 members have changed, but it still feels like very much the same steering group that started then. And maybe I might reflect on this a bit more at the end, but I think having a kind of core group that actually is really committed to and gets to know each other really well is, I think, very important to a civic university agreement. That's a different thing, I think, to the vice chancellors and equivalents across the city. I think it's a different thing, and I think that's been really effective in our grouping. Others may want to reflect on that as well. So where did we start then? Well, we made a few decisions. Firstly, we thought, well, we're going to start with our I think that might be on the previous slide actually. We thought we're going to start with our existing strategies, which had already been consulted on, find common ground, and that was what we had the workshop about. And that was a kind of mammoth workshop where we sort of put whiteboards and got our strategies and really try and think, okay, what are we zeroing in on? What are our strategies, which are already what we said we're going to do in consultant, so we're not reinventing wheels here. Where are they kind of coming together into areas that sort of are screaming out as the key things that our city wants us to do as a partnership? And that was a first draft. And then over the next months, we honed that draft, and series of meetings and series of people going away and doing fantastic work on it. And then another key thing happens in late winter 2022, we sort of agreed that we would launch the Civic University Agreement in June 23. That was in winter 2022. And that actually really focused us. So again, if I sort of want to take away is I think it's really good to have some kind of hard to shift deadline when you're involved in the sort of potentially endless negotiations between partners of what are you actually going to say in Civic University. We've got an imposed deadline and you can say, well, okay, we've got to get it done by that. You work backwards from there. It sounds obvious, but these things can kind of keep on in negotiations. And you know, 5 large organisations and complex ones, it can be very difficult to kind of come to a final agreement about things. So that really focused our minds, and negotiations on the text went into a different kind of mode at that point. I think it actually went into, okay, so this isn't just a document that we're just showing to our group. We're now having to share across our institutions and work out what the sign-off process is, get input so everyone feels happy. And that, of course, when you have 5 partners, someone changes something, you need to kind of go back around the process. It's like a kind of multi-partner agreement is as everyone can imagine, and knows been involved, is a complex and iterative and can be quite time-consuming, and is quite time-consuming business. Then we had an agreement our group felt we were happy with. Then there was a question of formal sign-off process, which are very different. We're going to reflect a bit on this at the end and maybe in the discussion. Internal sign-off is very different to each organisation. I can see Joanne smiling because it was the most straightforward, if I can say it, at City Bristol College. But the internal sign-off process, different large organisations can be long and complex, and of course then create new potential changes, which then have to go back around. So we were in that cycle, but the point is we had a deadline, so that drove it forward. Without that deadline of we want to launch at this big joint event that we already had planned, a sort of joint celebration between you and Bristol, we had that deadline. So, and then once it's got final sign-off, there's then a sort of final tug of war around the final format, the look, the feel, the images, where all the pictures go, and so on. So again, that's sort of non-trivial. This is a bit of a nerdy bit of the presentation, I'm aware, but that's a sort of non-trivial bit of the process as well. So if you haven't signed a Civic University Agreement and you're thinking of it, make sure leave time for that, because that was more time consuming than we imagined. But we did end up with this fantastic document, which I'm going to hand over to Tracy to talk a bit about what's actually in it.
Thank you, John.
And the launch event, sorry.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'll just add, in that process, I think we cannot thank enough John's team, because they took the heavyweight on that, and that kind of iteration process around all of the partners in many kind of quick phone calls as we were rushing to the deadlines. John and his team really led on, and I'm sure sleepless nights and a few grey hairs, but was an amazing. If we didn't have that, we definitely wouldn't have been such a good document as it is. So I think all of us have recognised that was absolutely crucial. But we did brilliantly. There's the picture of the signing event. Now that does not actually display what really happened. So just as a bit of a quick insight, what happened at that event with the 2 universities, all 5 partners were there, the leads from all of the organisations. They were sitting on stage. It's now a place called Brandon Hill. It's a beautiful setting. They were sitting on stage, full auditorium, and we had some students in the audience who we'd been warned might protest, and they did. So a couple of minutes into what was one of our community partners was chairing that session and talking about why the Civic University Agreement was so important, some students just came on stage and wouldn't leave. So, this great, lovely piece of work that we'd spent like a year putting together all suddenly was like, oh, we can't actually launch it. So what ended up happening was everybody went to the bar, obviously, and the 2 vice chancellors and the leaders stood around just one of the kind of high tables in the bar with a glass of wine and a microphone and just talked for about 5 minutes. You can see the picture down on the bottom right there, and just had a really informal chat about what challenges they saw in the city, what they felt, why the importance of the Civic University Agreement. So it turned out to be a really lovely, personalised event, but nothing that we'd planned. So that was quite a nice launch. But if we go on to what's actually in it, so what's in our document, And we've got kind of 4 main sections. And I'll start with, we started with a mission. And what was really important there was about our values, where, although all of the university, all of the partnership were working together, and as John says, not all together as 5, often in separate pairings, where were our values overlapping? So making sure in the mission that you actually address that was really important for us. And where do we have a common approach? Where do we kind of all agree? And that comes back to what's at the centre of the CUA. And I think for us, increasingly over time, and we probably didn't really acknowledge that this is what the centre was while we were building it, was actually coming out of the council, where it's what are the challenges of the city? What is who's at the centre? And I think we've written it in there, it's our local population. And that is made up of students and staff, but it's also made up of people who don't know anything or have no touch points with any of the universities or the college, but is absolutely crucial to the changes that we want to make and improve the experiences of living within this city region. So understanding who's at the centre, and it shouldn't be any of the individual partners, it's kind of what are you all working for and working towards, was really important. Then we've got our kind of 6 collaborative principles. And I'll just say there, this is probably the page that John spent the longest tearing his hair out on with all of us. You know, what are our starting areas? And I think what's important here was we've got 6 really kind of broad brushed areas that we all know are challenges for the city region, but having the together we will. So language is important in the CUA, and that together we will enabled us to have a less kind of parochial conversation and more kind of open conversation about what we felt we all needed to do for that common purpose, the local population. The next bit around our initiatives, that was really, you know, that was kind of what's the initiatives that you want to highlight, and just a demonstration really as to what we've already done, what's already going on, because as I'm sure in many of the cities that you all work in, there are a lot of initiatives already happening, and I'm sure if it's anything like Bristol, it's initiative overload, but really important to just kind of pull some of those out so every partner was able to demonstrate and show some of the things that they were working on, but also very proud of. And I think the last bit around oversight and process and governance, we're probably still working on, acknowledging that we, at that point of developing it, that we really needed it, but we probably didn't really pick up that element until we'd all finished the glass of wine at the launch event and kind of came up for air to work out how we were going to make this something real. So a really, really challenging document to pull together, but I think it's something for a long-term vision for us for the future to kind of keep coming back to. So I think I'm going to hand back to John now.
Thanks, Tracy. That's a nice reminder. Yeah, just to show you the page that Tracy's talking about. You can all see it online, I guess. But there's together we will, and there are these. So that's really not coming out at all, is it? But anyway, there is some detail underneath each one of those, which says some specifics that we're aiming to do. And yeah, you're right, Tracy. That was the whole that centre spread of the document was the one that was kind of tricky to align on, because whilst we do align the difference of emphases of different partners and exactly how you would want to phrase it and what the emphasis would want to be, and where, you know, that's where the kind of tricky negotiation came in. But you know, we got there. It can be done. So finally, before we throw open to questions, I'm just going to talk. I've got two more slides. Well, sorry, 3 more slides. 2 more slides for me, and then a slide for everyone to chip in on. A bit about delivery. So it is challenging enough just to get a Civic University agreement, but it can't be a document you just create and then file and draw. And we were all absolutely determined it wouldn't be that. We did talk a bit about delivery models during that process, but you do get slightly absorbed, as you can imagine from the description, in just getting a document that everyone can sign off. But what we did was we agreed that we would create, or really effectively keep, the existing steering group, who would be the drivers and the coordinators of this. And it was I think I would really, again, anyone think about it, so I would really strongly advise that the same group is a really good group to keep together. various talk of, well, do you bring in a sort of wider, a wider group at that point to be this bigger steering group? We actually thought not, because we've all got to know each other. We can pick up the phone, we can kind of chat informally. And I think that's absolutely an invaluable aspect of the CUA, that in the process of doing this, we really got to know each other well. And so that we decided we'll keep that steering group to be the driving group. We would have workshops, I'll come on to the workshops in a minute, to address the specific themes and drive particular actions on those themes. So rather than us in this kind of coordinating function deciding what we should do, we get the experts in our organisations and beyond in other partners in the city to see what actions we can take together, and then those are the actions we take to our organisations to deliver. So that the workshop model, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. But we also agreed we create a monitoring document to record activity, because again, that sounds a small thing, but we found things we were doing, collaborating on, which haven't really been shouted about, haven't really been sort of unearthed, just in those examples that we've given in the document itself already. But there are many more of those, and we're trying to start to log those. And in the quarterly meetings of the steering group, we surface more of those and log them. And then we present a briefing to senior teams in our institutions, and indeed potentially more widely, of that report on a twice yearly basis. And we've also agreed, we haven't had one of these yet, we have an annual meeting of VCs and CEO level colleagues in our institutions to review progress. And we say, this is what's happened, this is what we've done, is this the right strategic direction, to give that kind of strategic steer from the top of the organisations. So that's the sort of governance process we've set in place. We've had 2 steering groups, we've had 2 workshops so far, and Steve has done fantastic work on the monitoring document and the briefing, which we're currently sort of finalising at the moment. But I just want to mention as well, we also seize opportunities that we wouldn't have done collectively before. And there's a few examples of that have actually come directly out of just the fact that we're now part of a CUA steering group, and not just kind of individuals at our own universities. Many of you will be well aware of the Local Policy Innovation Partnership call that came out last year. Well, basically, to cut a long story short, we put in a collaborative bid, UWE and Bristol, but also including Bristol City Council and many partners across the city, for a social mobility innovation partnership. Now, very sadly, we didn't win that bid, but we got very far in the process. We got through the first stage, and we got an interview. That was led by Tracy as the PI. And I think we can both say we wouldn't have gone into that collaboration together were it not for having got to know each other and having talked about all this together as part of this the Civic University Agreement Group. Now, and we're both determined, well, we're all determined across the partnership, that we're going to revamp those ideas into another form in future. So whilst we failed in the particular bid, the work we've done towards that. So that's a particular example of something really tangible that's come out of the CUA. And just to say a little word on monitoring, because one of the tests, of course, that's required of a CUA is that you try and monitor, and that monitoring document we're going to try and develop to be something that we benchmark and so on. And we can maybe say a little bit more about that in discussion as well. The workshop. So we've had 2 workshops actually. The theme we picked for the workshop was widening participation in higher education, because that is such a key statistic at Bristol. As Hannah said, we below national average for HE progression rates, and some unbelievably stark differentials between, particularly famously between Clifton, the area I mentioned that the University of Bristol is based in, and some other parts of Bristol, from near 100% to 10 and less percent. It's incredibly stark. It's an incredibly stark reminder of what a divided city Bristol is. So we took that, and that is the statistic we quote at the beginning of the Civic University Agreement as an example of the sort of issues we're addressing as a partnership. So we agreed that we would get together. We already do a massive amount on this area. All of the partners do, but for many people, the message isn't cutting through, and it requires a huge amount of effort across many in the city to work together. So we need to pull in the right direction, which sort of sounds like an obvious thing, but it's quite hard to get done in practice. And we think these workshops are a real start towards that. There was a huge, really great turnout to these. Partners invited other organisations to this. It sort of happened organically, and FE involvement is actually is completely crucial in that, because of what Joanne described, their really deep reach into communities. And the actions are just being written up from that meeting, but one definitely agreed thing is we're going to join communications and social media campaigns by existing students aimed at encouraging young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to FE and HE, and there will be more, particularly around that kind of communication and coordination piece. So that's going to be an ongoing piece of work between the organisations that's come directly out of the CUA, and we're now looking into what the next thematic workshops will be, but one of them may be around students. Hannah mentioned growing student population in the city. Well, we want to look at how that student population can make a positive benefit to the city, and we want to really think creatively and think together about it. So that may well be a theme for a future workshop. So we'll set another work stream going around one of our other collaborative principal areas. So we're just going to round off. We thought it would be nice to, we're actually doing okay for time. We thought it would be nice to round off with just a few sort of personal reflections, and we invited everyone in the group just to send a bullet point on, their kind of, takeaways from this process that we've just described. So I'm just going to invite colleagues to just chip in and grab and talk a bit about maybe one each of the bullet points that they contributed. So please, who would like to go first?
You go first, Tracy. Go first.
Tracy,
the obvious one I'll pick up is that not all universities function the same. So I think as we started to work together, we kind of, the assumption is, well, they're University of Bristol, University of West of England, you're both universities, you've got the same, everything's the same. And I'm sure, as a general, we will have students, we will have staff, we will do research, but how we work is so fundamentally different. That I think that kind of, for me, maybe it was naively, that kind of came out during the process. And I think it recognising that, and then John and I in the teams trying to go, respecting the fact that we work differently, we have different needs, and different sign-off processes, and kind of different angst about different parts of the conversation and the CUA agreement. Some things that we would be like quite concerned by. John and colleagues, we are not bothered about that. Other things they'd be worried about, we'd be like, why? So I think it really came through that just assuming that because we're both universities, we're going to have the same agendas, it's all going to be the same, and the sign-offs and everything's going to be the same. Really, really came true that that's not the case. But I think by recognising that, actually we've kind of come through that. And now work better because we do understand that better. We understand each other better.
And the one I was just going to touch on was sort of the value add. Actually, it kind of links to sort of reporting needs of different, the work to requirements of different organisations. Because I think one thing we were conscious of is there is so much going on. And I think what we didn't want to claim credit in a sense. So when we are pulling together our monitoring reports and, activities of where we are, it's about thinking of things where we can really add value and maximise the convening role that the CUA plays. And we've seen that through the sort of widening participation workshop, bringing care leavers' voices in, and really sort of bringing stuff together. But yeah, not wanting to necessarily brand everything that's already happening. These things will be happening regardless. It's just about adding that value. But yeah, and maybe I'll pass on to Joanne for her reflections.
Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, I think mine followed on from Tracy's really. I think, we had a bit of a giggle yesterday. Not all universities are the same for sure. And FE is a completely different kind of organisation again. But I think it was really about learning how fast we could go. In FE, deadlines are often shorter. Teams are usually smaller. We have less resource for what you might term civic partnership arrangements. But as I say, our bread and butter is the very people in the city. Everybody is local and locally rooted. So I think it was brilliant to have both universities at the same time, recognising those differences and hopefully learning from each other in terms of how our organisations work.
I might just hop in as well and just sort of add as well, think about how to use your resources as effective as possible. So if there are networks like, One City or anything else within in your own cities, use that. I think all of us are very busy people, and we've got limited time to sort of put towards things. So I think if you can use those networks, that means that you can then unlock access to other parts of the city. So simply by going through One City, that means we've got, I think, about 140 different organisations represented on our boards. We've got about 40 different organisations and our city partners, but in our wider One City network, that's around, up to about maybe 1,000 organisations. Through our networks, it's even bigger again. So that's something that if you think about, we talked about the value of having this small core group working together, where it's really easy for us to pick up the phone and make those connections and make things happen. But then by using our then wider networks, it means that we can be effective, but also very punchy as well in the work that we are able to do.
Fantastic. Well, on that punchy note, Nina, thank you. I'll wrap it up there. I can see lots of questions have come in, so thank you all. Thanks my fellow panelists, and thanks for listening. I'll hand back to Chris now to take us through the Q&A session, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks to everyone for the questions that they've put in, which we'll field now. I've got a ton as well, so it might be that I try and squeeze some of my own in at the end. But there's a few questions, I suppose, that are around and build on this final slide that you've got. If you could go back and start again, what would you do differently? And any advice, particularly in relation to the thematic strands that you were looking to develop, about how you ended up landing on those ones. So I don't know who would be best placed to perhaps answer that. Maybe you, John?
Sorry, could you just repeat the second half of the question again, Chris?
The first one was around what you might do differently if you went back.
Yeah, I got that.
To start again. The first one was around any advice about how you ended up developing and firming up work on those specific thematic strands that you mentioned.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I tried to cover that, but obviously didn't make it close. Yeah, we drove it from our own existing strategies. So rather than start with a blank piece of paper, as if no one had ever written a strategy about us before, we derived it from existing strategy documents that we either had or were working on, based on consultation, internal, external, and that was why we didn't have an external. So we landed on the themes because we honed them down from existing strategy documents we had, basically, and that was why I went there. What would I do? That's a really tricky question. What we do differently, because I suppose now we just kind of write the document we've got and it would all be very quick, but it would have been impossible to get there without the process we've been through. So I mean, I can't think of sort of specific regrets about anything, any step we've taken, not at this stage anyway. Would anyone else like to have a go at that from a different perspective?
I think I would have, just probably because my impatience, I would have brought the timeline shorter. I think you fill the time, don't you? You fill the time to the day. Absolutely, you need a deadline. Importance of a hard deadline, and partly our hard deadline was driven by availability of VCs, wasn't it? But I think we probably, if we'd had a tighter deadline, we probably would have just gone. We've got to clear our diary for 2 days and lock ourselves in the room and get to near final draft. And I think.
Yeah, that's probably fair. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because I think some of the work that you and your team did, John, which was amazing. That was hard graft, wasn't it? Kind of negotiating and going around the houses multiple times. Whereas I wonder if we'd kind of all just locked ourselves in a room and got to what we were happy with, knowing that it still needed to go around the houses, that might have shortened that and kind of perhaps relieved some of your that negotiation period, perhaps. Don't know.
Yep, it's a good thought.
Thanks. There's a couple of questions around funding and resourcing, both in relation to how you funded the development of the agreements, the time and energy and resource required to go into that, and then also how you are funding those activities, particularly if they're sat outside of the sort of business as usual of your work. So a question about funding and resourcing.
Do you want me to? Shall I take that? In terms of the writing of it, it didn't really. It just required people to clear time, to make time to do it within existing roles, and that, I guess, we just managed that depending on what the particular arrangements were at different universities. And actually, throughout the process, actually, there have been restructures at the universities and changes of roles and so on, but the group creating this has remained the same. In terms of resourcing it now, well, it's really the same. It's the same thing, I suppose. I mean, Steve Dale, a colleague on the call, is works in my team at Civic University, Civic Partnerships Manager, is doing quite a bit of work in terms of the convening on the Civic, the group, the monitoring group. So it's really I suppose we're all putting time into it, and there isn't currently specific money attached to it, if that's not. Anyone else want to add to that?
And are you looking to offer a pot up for projects as part of it? Is one of the questions.
Well, it's a great idea, and yes, I conceded various questions about funding and opportunities. Well, the Social Mobility Innovation Partnership that I mentioned, led by Tracy, which Tracy may want to say more about, that was an attempt to get quite a substantial pot of money right in this area, which we didn't get, but we're looking at how we review that. All of our institutions, certainly UWE and Bristol, do have pots to do civic work. We haven't yet had that discussion. It's quite a good point, actually. We haven't yet had a discussion about how we might sort of hive off bits of those small pots for something which specifically works on Civic University agreement partnership working. But we don't know. There isn't certainly sort of hived off, X grand pot that we spend on Civic University agreement initiatives. Not yet, anyway. We haven't quite got to that point. It's an interesting thought, though. I think we could take that away.
I think so at UWE we don't have a Civic University team particularly. So and what's been really good about developing it, we just, as John said, you just kind of freed up time to develop it. And what happens now is, because I think the way in which it's been structured is built on things that are already happening, part of our existing strategies. We have got people who are focused on achieving those anyway, because that's part of our strategy. So it's making sure we're linking those people. So our WP team went to the workshop. In fact, the second one I couldn't make, so I wasn't there. They just went and pulled in the people they needed. So what the trick is, I think, to develop it into around things that are already strategically important to your university. So you're not needing an army of additional resource to enact it. One of the things that we're looking at the moment, which is again which comes back to the mission, it's about what are we doing for our local population. So the council have come up with their list of areas for research that they're interested in, and both universities are looking at how we can repurpose perhaps or use some of our social policy funding to work on that, fund our academics to work on those particular areas that the council have acknowledged and said they would need some support in to get further information to make a bigger impact in initiatives and policies across the region. So using what you've currently got, but really doing it as a bigger team in terms of the CUA. And if we're all doing that, it has a way bigger impact than us picking it off individually.
Tracy and John, perhaps there's a question specifically for universities, I suppose, but maybe as well for the college. But I think probably the college is much more obviously an educational institution of place. Was there any sense of pushback that institutional mission shouldn't be aligned to place? Was there a sense that this was not business as usual at all from colleagues within the universities in particular?
Absolutely not from UWE. Again, it plays into the strategy already.
Yeah.
It's pulling out things that are already happening. This is, I think, the bit that Hannah was talking about and Nina and described really, really brilliant. Again, it's always lovely to re-see why we're together. And is that around the kind of common objectives that we've all got? in the place-based initiative. And so I think, you know, pulling our students, our staff, our research areas, and really pointing them all in the regional place-based agenda is core for the sector at the moment anyway, and certainly didn't have pushback from within UE.
I mean, certainly there can be a characterisation, perhaps a caricaturing really of Russell Group universities, at least some of them, as not more wanting to be associated globally than locally. And part of that, of course, is the rationale for the civic university movement, but that's not necessarily what we're seeing as part of the network. And the approach that the University of Bristol have taken seems to be at odds with that characterisation as well. John, I don't know if you've got anything to say around that.
No. I mean, there's interestingly, Russell groups are far more likely to be amongst the original signatories of the 2019 pledge to create a civic university agreement than non-Russell groups. Interestingly, so that sort of interestingly goes the other way almost. The Russell groups are maybe kind of, you know, returning to their civic roots in the same sort of narrative that I told about Bristol. So no, in terms of Bristol, enormous enthusiasm across the institution for the civic agenda, actually, amongst professional services staff, academic colleagues, and at all levels. I think there is a bigger sector tension about incentives for new things in civic. So I think at the moment we're in that phase of trying to hide, you know, I mean, UKRI are increasingly creating, like the local policy innovation partnership call, increasingly creating pots which are either not just require civic partners to be part of something else, but actually put civic partners at the heart of the whole thing, which is this local policy innovation partnership. But I think we need more of that across the sector, that kind of actually incentivizing civic being at the forefront rather than just being a lens through which you see other things. But at the moment, having it as a lens through which you see existing activity is really enthusiastic, and there's lots and lots of people at the university who want to you know, undertake civic specific activity and you know, very great enthusiasm for this third pillar of the strategy which we created.
Thanks, John. Nina, I see you coming in, I think.
I was about to just add as well, from the sort of the other side, from, you know, from working in partnership organisations, I think it's really key maybe to perhaps look at the leadership of both the universities and the college. They are they've got a long history of being involved in lots of different things across the city. So Steve West, for example, you know, he's been the president of the Chamber of Commerce, the local enterprise partnership. And, you know, we've had senior people from the colleges and the things also involved in other initiatives right across the city, and that's been true for a number of years since I've, you know, at least all. So I think as well, just perhaps looking at, you know, that's that leadership and you know, knowing that they have, you know, such a big footprint in the city, so many staff, they've got such a, you know, they have such the ability to create so much change in the city as well. So perhaps looking at the characters that lead these organisations as well might be something that's of interest.
Great, thank you.
I just very briefly add, I absolutely agree with Nina, and I think there's something about Bristol. There's something about Bristol as a place in terms of the collaboration, which I think probably made it easier. And if anything, we'd possibly been treading on each other's toes if we hadn't come together with the agreement.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions around students and staff as well, and how you involve them in the development process, and whether there was any pushback or challenge to this approach. Perhaps starting with you, Joanne, and then talking to the universities.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, Chris, clearly the college is place-based. There's certainly no concern with us supporting Bristol. That, you know, that's part of our key role. I think for colleges, you know, our resources are limited, and it's about always showing where the added value is. And for those, as part of this, is getting the support from other organisations, including the two universities, around support for our students. And that forms many different views, also getting CPD for support for our staff. So I think for us, probably uniquely, it's probably not as relevant, but I would encourage universities to talk to your local college and explore the benefits there for them. So it's probably one of resource rather than, yeah, in terms of mission, absolutely crucial.
Tracy, John, anything from?
Well, I mean, sorry to repeat, I suppose it's maybe repeating the point I said before, you know, we involve students and staff quite extensively in the creation of the strategy, and this was a development that we didn't want to add too many more loops that would delay even more. So we haven't really had, no, I don't think we have had pushback actually. So it's an interesting question. We don't send people complaining they haven't been involved in the process. I think they're just pleased there's something there.
I think also something to note is, and I know I'm probably banging on about it, but it is based on things we're already doing, and we're just bringing ourselves together with more kind of power together, and that enables more to happen. So I know within my team, people were kind of, well, aren't we doing all this already? Why do we need a civic university agreement? But there is something important about, as John said at the start, writing it down, going through that process of really agreeing what it is that we do have in common and how we might want to work together. And the benefit, and coming to what Hannah was saying about adding value, what's the additionality that having a CUA brings, because you're all doing so much together, is very difficult for us to kind of put our fingers on at the moment. And I think that's one of the challenges we're having in the steering group, is going, how do we measure the actual added value when the benefit is already, we can see it in multiple different places, but you probably can't draw a straight line from a conversation that's happening with that academic and that counsellor or that lecturer in the college back to the CUA being signed. But probably if it wasn't there, we wouldn't have perhaps been as open as we are to those collaborations. And I think it is the openness of having trust within our partnership to know that it's okay to pick the phone up and go, I don't really know about this, but do you? And who could help us with it? And opening ourselves up to those kind of I don't know things. Perhaps previously we probably wouldn't have done so much. So I think the trust is part of the process. Building that trust is part of the process, which enables things to kind of flower and go beyond what we'll ever be able to put our arms around.
Thank you. Just moving us on to, there's a specific question from Des McNulty, and with regard to Sue and Des's kind of points around this. I think you are right that the international isn't an either or, and there is huge enthusiasm within the sector for place-based activity. And I think Des, yourself and John have written quite extensively about the fact that Civic doesn't have to mean city-based, and we've discussed some of that today. So I suppose you do have a question, Des, around specifically on research training. I wondered whether, Tracy, you were perhaps the best to answer that. You know, do you provide, well, let me try and find the question specifically. Do you provide training for people undertaking demand responsive projects as opposed to more traditional curiosity or discovery research related projects?
I'm not sure I fully understand that question. So it's hi Des, what's the, perhaps you can just expand on that. Is Des able to speak? I know he's able to speak, but is he able to?
Yeah, I don't think in this forum, but perhaps perhaps you can exchange an email or some of the team can connect you.
Are you talking about doing it jointly with? I mean, we I guess I'll just, so from a research point of view, we absolutely now have more regular conversations with our counterparts at Bristol on doing collaborative research projects together, not just the ones that the council have put forward as proposals. That's one example, which will be a proactive way of us doing that. But responsive mode also, you know, we look all the time at where we can join together and respond in a joined up way. And there's still, that's not necessarily plain sailing. And, you know, it's not all roses, you know, because we're different organisations from a research point of view. And sometimes, you know, we may feel we're stronger, but Bristol may feel they're strong. So there's, you know, those negotiations that need to always happen, but those conversations are now very easy and happen a lot. So that's definitely a benefit of the work that we've done to get to this point. But I'm not sure that's what Des asked.
No, perhaps he could contact you.
Sorry, Des.
Independently. I have a question around some things that you've mentioned in relation to student populations. there is currently a debate going on, for example, around the benefits that international students bring to cities and places, and the pressures that they can put on the systems in cities, health and education and others. Do you see this agreement as a way of enabling conversations around integrated planning, around student populations in the broader sense, or have you done any of that within Bristol?
I can pick maybe that up and pass on to you, John, maybe. Yeah, I think, I mean, yeah, absolutely. So I think, the building blocks are there in terms of we've got, active day-by-day conversations on the Temple Quarter, sort of huge, 60-hectare project, around the station that we're working with UOB as a key partner. So, and, there's a live conversation around our local plan, and, there's a lot of active conversations around that space. I think certainly, I think I mentioned international in my sort of 5 minutes, because I think we completely, our international team works in so many different sort of arenas and environments, and we, there's that real opportunity, isn't there, with the diaspora and the international alumni, and about making those links and bringing that sort of civic voice in terms of our twinning and things like that. And obviously, we totally recognise as well that the value of that income and their presence in the city is really important. So it certainly, I think it's a conversation already happening, but I think this sort of CUA, as I say, just builds a bit of a framework and probably brings together more touch points and more convening to enable us to have those joint conversations. And yeah, most recently, for example, I know both Steve and Evelyn joined a Core Cities Network meeting that we facilitated here in Bristol, and had that exact conversation, Chris, about, where there is that commonality in both the sort of council leadership, ambitions for the city, and also the challenges that universities are facing on that front. So yeah, but I don't know if John or Tracy have other bits to add.
Well, just to briefly, actually, yeah, this is a really big question for the sector and for cities. I mean, the question of what this group can do about it, and what role this group can play in addressing it. I think yes, it can, and I think we've talked about future workshops under the auspices of the Civic University Agreement and tackling that issue, and being a kind of that sort of convening force to saying, well, we're doing a lot together. What are we not doing? What more can we do? Who do we need to bring into a discussion to really listen? And groups, we have a group called the Bristol Student Community Partnership, which all the Civic University partners are involved in, which is an existing thing, which is about residents' associations and discussing with them concerns they have and what the universities together are doing. But I think the Civic University Group could sort of take it to a more strategic, future-looking level. So I think basically the answer is yes, the group can have a role in that, although it is a really big question that we're all addressing in different ways. Would you agree with that, Trace, or others?
So I think Des has responded, Tracy, with a bit more clarity. It's how and whether we are training academics to respond to with different approaches to what partners want, rather than what perhaps they can supply. So it's demand-led rather than supply-led research activity, I think, and whether we can provide training from that.
Yeah, okay, understood now. I think interesting, we don't do any kind of formal training on that, but I think what's interesting is how more of our academics are working more directly with the council, with the other organisations, charity organisations, so, more of the community-based organisations than perhaps they were a year to pre-COVID, definitely. So I think we don't do any proper kind of formal training on it, but I think more are encouraged to do that type of work, I think.
Thank you. I am aware of time, and there are some slightly specific questions and others that I think we have kind of answered. So I'll ask one final question and ask colleagues from across the board how and where you're going to measure the impact of this. How will you know whether you've been successful in relation to the agreement? What's your thinking now, or is that going to emerge in the next stages of development of your CUA?
Do you want me to start on that? This is what this is another tricky one. This is a tricky one, of course, because I think again across the sector, there is this question of what do we measure, what are we measuring in relation to these kind of third civic strategic pillars that of different kinds that universities are creating, and there's a lot written about the need and desire to measure in a way that we do other activity. I mean, my take on that, this is just from in the base of individual universities. My take on that is it's quite early days in a formalised civic strategy. We don't yet have that sort of, you know, sector-wide incentives for civic activity that therefore lead to the kind of clear metrics we have in other core pillars of our operation in research and education. So I think we have an issue. The Civic University Group then sort of puts all that together and makes it even more complicated in a group. So it's no surprise that this is a bit of a challenge across the CUA piece. I mean, we're looking at monitoring our own strategy. Hannah, sorry, I think Nina alluded to the use of the United Nations SDGs. We worked very closely with the City Office and City Council for many years over based on the voluntary review of the One City Plan and so on. So we're looking to adapt that to create KPIs for our own civic strategy. And then I think it would be good then to import that sort of thinking to the Civic University Group. But the basic answer to your question is that in development, Chris? Yes, it's all work in development. We haven't really got there yet. We're currently doing effectively qualitative monitoring of what we're achieving and what impact we're having.
Okay, thank you. Tracy, you've unmuted, so I think you probably want something to add.
So I think for me, success with the CUA is when we have a framework in place for the organisations to work together, a scaffolding that will maintain and be a method of working or an approach that sustains and is there beyond the life of these us as colleagues who've worked together over the last 18 months to build this CUA, so that it's got a life of its own, that it's able to sustain changes in vice-chancellors and changes in governments and still have the local population at the centre of it and maintain really positive value-added work for the local population. I think for me now how we get to that, how we build that, I think is our challenge. And we're a startup. We're very early stage still, so a way to go.
Great. Listen, on that, thank everyone very much. I'm going to draw us to a close now because I am mindful of time. So can I thank all of our speakers, Tracy, John, Joanne, Hannah and Nina, and say to everyone, thanks very much for attending today. I would urge you all to subscribe as well to the Civic University newsletter. That's the way in which you can keep up to date with everything going on. And of course, we do have Civic on, a conference that we're hosting at Sheffield Hallam on activities of this space. But it's been absolutely fascinating to hear about everything that you're doing in Bristol. Quite inspiring, actually, and plenty of food for thought on a purely parochial, selfish level, given that we're thinking about this in relation to Sheffield as well at the moment. So absolutely fantastic to hear from you all, and the approach seems like an absolutely spot on one. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Everyone. Bye.
Bye.